Okay, we're here with lesson 4 in the series, which corresponds with chapter 7 in your manual regarding job management. If you don't mind briefly taking your paper manual and opening it to the table of contents section in the front and looking at chapter 7, you'll see there are several subdivisions within that chapter, and it may be useful to you as we're going along here to glance at those subdivisions because we're going to be doing things in the same order as are the subject matters indicated by those subdivisions. Speaking of your manual, I just want to quickly reiterate that while this video series should be very, very helpful to you in learning to comprehend the generalities, there still needs to be someone in your office who actually reads the manual and picks up the detailed information that's available there. There is a great deal in your manual in terms of details that we just won't have a chance to cover here. Okay, again, the subject of this chapter is job management, and in that regard, the first thing we're going to be talking about is the work in progress system. And the first thing I want to point out to you in regard to the work in progress system is this form right here, which we call the current jobs or the jobs current form. We call it that because it basically displays each of your current jobs. I'm going to hit my page up key here, and I'm going to go through the set of jobs that currently exist at this time in this operation. I don't know if I mentioned before, you might notice the old date up here. Basically, we're working with a data set here that was dated with that date, and that's the reason why you'll see that date here, is to make that data set appear current. Anyway, I can page through here and look at all the various records that represent the jobs currently pending within this organization. I can do some quick key things like I can hit control page up and I'm instantly looking at the first record. You might notice right here it says record number 1, meaning this is the first record. This is the invoice number assigned to it. I can hit control page down and I'm looking at the last record. I can see by that number that I currently have 172 jobs pending. You might notice, I guess I pointed this out before, it's basically the same information in this section as came from the originating call sheet, but then we have a history over here. We have a status section here that shows us the status of the job. And there's very many tools we can use here. We can search for a particular record based on the invoice number, name, address, telephone number, PO number, etc. We can do various actions in the job record, and so on. The job's current form you might think of as sort of your command central for managing and keeping track of and finding information as connected with currently pending jobs. One little tip for you, let's say I want to do a search on a name. I could come over here and click on name to initiate the search and then type in the name I want to search on and do the search. It says find next item. I can simply hit enter again, or I could click to search for the next Smith in the list and so on. But it's actually easier than that. I'll just hit escape and I'm back out of that search. I could just hit N for name and I don't have to use my mouse and then type some characters. I don't even have to type the whole name and then do my search. Lots and lots of conveniences like that built in to make it easy and fast as can be. Another little detail, I'm going to escape out of that form and I'm going to hit Shift F7, which brings up this form, which we call the Jobs Perusal form. The purpose of this form is to allow you to review out of that current jobs form only those particular job records that happen to be in any of a specified status. For example, if I wanted to see only those jobs that were in working to schedule status, I could click here and it would show me that I've got 3 items in that status, and I can simply rotate through those 3 items and see what the 3 items are that I have in working to schedule status or any other particular status category that I'm interested in. Again, I'll hit escape to get out of that. I'll hit F7 to come back into my jobs current form. Now I want to talk briefly about scheduling on existing jobs. You may recall that when we're scheduling on a new job, I'm escaping again, we type the information into a call sheet. I just did a bunch of, silly characters there. And we end up scheduling from the call sheet, and the initial appointment basically goes into the system when we click on job sale and we create a job record with the pending appointment. But of course, on a number of jobs, you're going to need to reschedule after the technician's already been there the first time. When that's done, typically what you'll do is you'll hit F7 to bring up the job records form, or current jobs form, I should say, and locate the item that you're interested in. Let's say it's this one here. I'll just hit escape to get rid of that further search. And there's several ways I could go ahead and schedule from here. I could, much as is done in the call sheet, right-click here on the address line, and I'll see this person's location, and I can go ahead and schedule from here. Why don't I just go ahead and do that for the heck of it. This takes me right to the schedule list form. I can go ahead and assign the technician here and make it definite if I want to, and hit enter. And that inserts the item into the schedule list for me, and it made a little historical notation here in the job's history for me indicating that it's scheduled. There's other ways I can do it too. For example, let's go to another job record here and say I'm wanting to schedule this one. Another way I could do it is I could click on this item here, or simply hit S for scheduling, and well, what do you know? There's an existing appointment for this job, which leads me to another alternative, and that would be changing existing appointments, but really that's not what I wanted to show you right now. So let's go to another one here and make sure there's no existing appointment. But if we go to an old one here, we can find one there's no existing appointment for. Yeah, this one doesn't have an existing appointment. So I'll select scheduling. Again, I could click or just hit S with my keyboard. And again, it brings up the schedule list form where I'll actually be inserting the appointment. I can select any date I want. I can actually use my cursor keys here rather than the mouse. Let's say I do that. And I select this date. And I could type in a time. Let's say we gave them 9:30 for a time. Or I could have selected from the list. And whichever tech I'm assigning it to. And what did I do there? Let's say we're making it definite again for that technician, and so on. And that job is now scheduled. Now let's go back to that previous job, because the next subject I want to touch on is, let's suppose we have an existing appointment for this person, and I'm interested in changing that appointment or deleting it. Say the person calls up when we have to reschedule them. I'll click here on scheduling. Well, this must not have been the one that had an existing appointment. Oh, it wasn't. It was actually the second Smith when I do a name search. Okay, this one does. Okay, let's change this appointment. What happened is when I clicked on scheduling or hit S for scheduling, is the system looked within the schedule list and it found that existing appointment for me. It's actually located it and placed it in editing boxes here for me. And it's asking if I want to edit or change it, delete it, or make a new appointment. If I selected make a new appointment, it would ignore that existing one and just make a new one. Let's say I select edit. I could have just hit E, obviously. I could just come over here and change it to say between 9 and 12. If, say, that's the change I did, and hit enter. And it's done, and we get the little historical notation here saying the appointment was changed. Had I selected deletion, I could have followed through on that option, and so on. So anyway, changing your existing appointments in any manner is just that easy. Okay, now we're moving on to the third element in our work in progress system, which involves reporting on jobs. Now let me just briefly explain to you. Service Desk has an expectation that for every appointment that is made by the system and which isn't canceled or deleted, someone within your organization will be making a report back to Service Desk, informing Service Desk about what happened on that appointment. We call that report back to the system about what happened when the technician fulfilled the appointment. We call that the post-action report. Post-action in the sense that it's after the action of the technician having fulfilled the appointment. The post-action report, it's a very important and fundamental element of Service Desk. It's the method that Service Desk uses to collect all kinds of information that go into a whole bunch of different systems, as you'll shortly see. It ties a ton of things together. There are several different ways you can set up the post-action report, and I highly recommend reading that section in the manual. But basically, there's several alternatives. One of the major alternatives is whether it will be someone in your office that is doing the post-action reports on behalf of the technicians, or whether it will be the technicians themselves. By the way, with the telephone ringing there, I had to take a little break from the recording, and I realized that I didn't mention the way you bring up this job's current form is by pressing F7. As you can see, that corresponds with the little symbol up here saying jobs current that corresponds with the position of your F7 function key on your keyboard. Anyway, back to the current subject matter. Many people are skeptical about having their technicians make their own post-action reports, but please rest assured we have the system set up so that if you prefer to do it that way, it actually works very, very well, and we've set it up so that security concerns and so on are fully addressed. In fact, let's start out by showing you that element of the system. Let's take this job record right here, which is 651.95. And, well, you know what I'm going to have to do here. I'm going to take a break for a second. Okay, I had to check on something there. Let's suppose that I'm a technician working in this office. My name's Richard Weimer, and I come in the afternoon after finishing my jobs in the next morning, and it's I need to sit down and report on my jobs, basically do the post-action reports that are involved. I'm going to confront a screen that's been set up for me that looks like this. Now you might notice if I hit escape, I'm asked for a password to get out, which the technicians won't have. They get a little note here that they can't get out without having the password, and so on. They don't have access to the various menu items and so on. This is all to provide security so your technicians can't get into an area where you don't want them to be. The little note up here says Service Desk Tech Window Mode, press any key to log in. So the technician presses any key on the keyboard. He's asked for his tech code, which is just his initials. He types in RW. He's welcome to the system. Oh, it says he has an item of mail waiting. You can press any key to begin reading. And actually this was an email from me, as it happens, back in my former business, asking Richard to talk to me about the Harrison job where he'd been that morning. And my expectation would be when he got that email that he'd come and walk into my office and say, you asked me to talk about the Harrison job, and then I'd be reminded to talk to him about something. At any rate, or he could reply back to me. He could send email to other people and whatever. So these emails are pretty handy for the purpose. And now he's basically, the dialogue says, now that you've seen the mail, please press any key to report on your jobs. So he presses any key, and this basically just takes him through a dialogue. He's got the invoice numbers on his stack of tickets from the work he's completed. And he's asked here to type in the invoice number, so he does so. He's asked to confirm this is the item. He could click with the mouse, or he can just hit Y for yes. Are you reporting on that particular appointment? Yes. Enter your start time. Richard, unfortunately, was habitually running late, so I'm going to say he started at 3:30. And let's say he finished at 4:15. You might notice I'm using a decimal here instead of a colon. You can use either interchangeably. It just happens to be easier when your fingers are on the numeric keypad to use a decimal. I just hit enter to enter it. Now it's asking to create a unit info sheet for the machine he worked on. I'm going to skip past that. Enter an element of your work. Let's see, the complaint was fan won't shut off. Let's say he replaced fan switch. This is probably a poor example to use because we didn't do a lot of furnaces. Any more items to report? No. Do you need to inquire in any parts? Now, if he did say yes here, it would create a part order inquiry request item by which that order would be managed. I'm going to say no. Did you use any parts from stock? Let's say yes. Fan switch. These actually won't be the right kinds that would have been used on a furnace, but I'll do it here even so, just to pretend. Actually, he didn't have any of those on his truck, the system is telling us. Let's say yes. Let's say use one from the office. I think we had some in the office. Okay, found a listing for this. Is this the one you used? Yes. Any additional items used from stock? No. Any money collected? Yes. Let's say you collected a check. Is the surname the same as on the invoice? Yes. Serial number, let's say 123, and the amount was 123.18. Enter. Any additional items of money collected? No. Is the job done? Yes. And he's made the report, the post-action report on that particular job. And the information regarding it has fed into all the different systems to which those items relate. I'm going to escape out of here now. It's giving him a congratulations that he's reported on all of his jobs. There's none outstanding that he hasn't reported on. If there were, it would tell him that that was the case. There are other things he can do here. to a limited extent. For example, he can do searches in the customer database if he's curious about past jobs that he's done or that perhaps other people have done. He wants to know the history. That way he doesn't have to bug you to find out. He can do the intra-office email. He can print a list of his restock needs and then hand the list to someone in your office to restock him. He can also view the dispatch map, although he's not allowed to do any editing here, so that he can look at his own schedule graphically for days in the future, for the present day, and so on. So we give him some limited access to the extent it's beneficial, but certainly not unlimited access. When he escapes out all the way to log out, this is as far as he gets, and he can't get further without that password, and therefore you maintain the security that you need. Anyway, that's one way to accomplish the post-action report, having the technicians do it on their own behalf with a computer that's set aside from their purpose and kept in this tech window mode where they can log in and out and be restricted in their access to just those particular areas where you want them to be. See, I'm going to have to escape out of here again with my password. And that's one way to do it. But let's suppose that that method doesn't work for you. You prefer to have a person in the office do the post-action reports on behalf of the technician. There's a couple different ways you can do that. Number one, the in-office person could sit down with a stack of invoices that had been turned in by the technicians after having done the appointments and simply hit Alt F7, which brings up this form again. Basically the same form that you saw back in the tech window mode, only here it's not in the tech window mode, it's right here in the general service desk interface. And it works much the same if an in-office person is reporting, except in this case it's geared to a person doing it aside from the technician, for an office person doing it for the technician. But it goes through the same basic dialogue. This form, by the way, we call this the dialogue method of doing the post-action report because, as you saw, it takes the operator through kind of a dialogue process, asking a series of questions which the person then simply answers. Anyway, this is an older method. And again, it's an alternative, but we have a much newer method, actually a very new method at this point in time, for making the post-action report when it's an in-office person doing it. And we think, actually we've found already, even though we just a short time ago introduced this, that this method is vastly preferred for when it's an in-office person doing it. And this method is based on this new form. We call it the fill-in-the-blanks method. The method to bring this form up. Actually, before I show you that, let me just remind you of something. I'm showing you lots of things to bring up that involve quick keys. Let me just remind you, you can click on Command Summary here, and General Commands, Access via Function Keys, and you'll see here that all the different forms that you can bring up with function keys are listed. We have a whole bunch here connected to the job management system. The jobs current form, which I showed you, is F7. The jobs archive form we'll get to. The jobs perusal form I've shown you is Shift F7. The job reports form number 1 is the old dialogue method, Alt F7. And the new one I'm about to show you is the job reports form number 2, which is the fill in the blanks method, which is Shift Alt F7. You'll see it says right here. So I'll come back to here, and you'll see if I hit Shift Alt F7, it brings up this newer form for the post-action report, fill in the blanks method, and begins by asking me to indicate the invoice number I'm reporting on. This is probably actually easiest if you're sitting, or your office person is sitting with that stack of invoices turned in by the techs that they're going to go through to make the post-action reports. An alternative is, I'll escape out of there, if you're actually looking at the job record on which you want to make the post-action report. Let's see, let's suppose we're going to make a post-action report on this one right here. You'd simply hit Shift Alt F7 from this context, and when you do that, the system assumes this is the job record on which you want to report. It shows you the appointment that's currently pending. If there were more than one, it would show you the multiple appointments, and you could select the appointment that you're making the report on. Since there's only one here, I could click it with my mouse, or I can simply hit Enter on my keyboard. It assumes that's the one. It's basically going to collect exactly the same information as that other dialogue method that was shown, only in this case it's a fill in the blanks method. Let's see, I'm going to suppose use there until 12:10. By the way, this little asterisk here you could click on, and you could make it so that the times were required. The default is you can put the times in whether or leave those items blank if you prefer. I get to click over here, tab over to here. That's a Kenmore dryer. Let's suppose he replaced gas valve coils as his repair. Move over to here, and you see it says machine info UIS. I don't recall if I've shown you the unit info sheet. I think I have. Stands for a unit info sheet. I can simply right click or enter here. Actually, I think I could even just click and it brings up the unit info form. You'll notice this button here is the one that's selected. I could click on it, or I can simply hit enter to do the same thing since that's a selected button, and that's usually easier. Type in a model number, Kenmore model number. It's going to start at 110, and I'll make up some other numbers here. And serial number, I'll make up some numbers, and we could also have purchase date, selling dealer, other number, etc. I could now click here on OK, make connection, or simply hit enter. It's inserted the information here. You'll notice we now have a dark line underneath the items type and items make boxes here. That signifies there's a unit info sheet attached to this job. It basically attached it from here when we did it in this context. You can also attach directly from the job record. Or, of course, if we'd attached the unit info sheet from the call sheet to start out with, from which we created the job record, then the attachment would have already been there. Anyway, I could either tab over to the next box here to fill out, or I could have clicked on it. At this point, let's say I want to special order something or make an inquiry. Let's see, what is the complaint here? Gas needs gas valve and flex installed. Blah, blah, oh, well, anyway. I'll go ahead and hit enter. Let's suppose that they need a new timer knob, but they're not sure if they want to order or not, so we'll make it tentative status. I'll hit enter to go ahead and create that appointment. You'll see it's listed that as an item being ordered, or at least that an inquiry is being made on. If I change my mind, I could click on this item in the list and come back here and mark it for deletion, but I'm not going to change my mind right now. I can come over here to the next item, tab over, or I could right click on the box. Any of these three boxes, when you want to basically invoke their function to enter something, you can right click or enter, and it actually tells you that if you try something else. Let's say he used a gas valve coil kit. Let's suppose he used that one out of stock. I'll hit enter, inserts it in my list. It also mentions that he needed a flex, so I'll put in flex here. Installed flex. And we'll come back down here at the right click and we'll put a gas flex connector. Let's say he used that one right there. So I've got those two items listed, and now I'll come over here and I right clicked there, and let's say collected check number 45678 for 155.18, and I'm going to hit enter to insert that, and that's inserted. Much as over here I could click and go back to edit or delete this item. I think I mentioned before, you can left click in many boxes where we have lists of records. You can left click to edit, or you can right click to delete. I don't really want to delete, so I'll escape. I'll escape, and I'm back here. Let's suppose I've now got everything set up the way I want it. By the way, the last query here is this job done. It's defaulted to no. Since I ordered a part, it's got to assume the job's not done. I'll click on OK. As I do that, you'll notice the little thing here says Control Enter, which means an alternative for clicking on this button would have been to hit Control Enter. And as I do so, it's finished the report, and it's created this historical note in the job record for me. By the way, I think I forgot to show you when we did the dialog method of post-action report that it did exactly the same thing, placing this kind of historical note here on this date and time. RW reported that it was reported that RW is there on 19 Wednesday, 11:15 to 12:10. Replace gas valve coils, installed flex, requesting P&A. That's price and availability on timer knob. Use one K34929 and one R8375 from stock. Collected 155.18, check number blah blah. So we have that historical notation there regarding what happened. And the important thing here is that the system simultaneously sent the information regarding each of these processes into each of the venues where those things are relevant, which I'll presently show you. First of all, you may recall we indicated the technician had used a couple of parts out of his truck stock. If we either click on F10 or here on inventory, which corresponds with F10, up comes our inventory control and maintenance form. Let's suppose it's time to provide the technician with a restock for parts he's used, or because he's used items he no longer has up to the minimal levels we expect to maintain him in. I'll select transfer items to from trucks. Obviously I could hit T or click. I want to review needs and disperse to truck, and we'll select the technician that's involved here that we're wanting to restock, and up comes the list of everything that he's presently deficient in. And you can see the two parts that we indicated in that post-action report as having been used off his truck. It now shows that he's deficient in and he needs restocked. I could quickly print this list, or just maybe if it's a few items like this, remember what's on it. Walk into my storeroom, pull these items off the shelf, and let's say I gave him one of these. I just hit one enter, and so on, to indicate that I'd moved those items to his truck, and so on. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because this is part of what I want to show you in more detail in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to escape out of here right now because I want to go back and show you another couple of elements. Oh, you might have noticed there as I came back here, this call sheet was over the top of this form. That brings up something else I want to mention. That's not right. That shouldn't have happened. That's essentially a bug, and it's a brand new bug. The reason I mention that is because Service Desk is a very, very live product. It's constantly being worked on, improved, honed, new features, and so on. And as we do that, we sometimes, actually I, unfortunately sometimes introduce bugs that weren't previously there. I generally fix them very fast. This will be fixed later today now that I know that it's there. In fact, I generally fix bugs the same day I learn of their existence. But it just happens to be the case that as improvements are being made, the law of unintended consequences comes in and sometimes results in new bugs being created that weren't there. But you can almost assume that they're almost always very, very temporary. Anyway, besides ordering parts, which went into the inventory control process, he requested price and availability on a timer knob. That takes us to this F8 form, which we call the parts process form, which is used, and we'll go into more detail in a minute, to keep track of parts being ordered. And we can select here items in inquiry order, and we see that sure enough, for this customer, this invoice number, this type of machine, and so on, we have a tentative order for a timer knob, and we'll show you how that's processed later on. Come back to here, and the third item here was we indicated having collected funds. We'll go to the funds form, which is Control F9. We'll select view items. We want to look at checks, receipts, items that are undeposited. I'll page down here, and sure enough, here's a listing for the check that was collected. This form, by the way, is used to keep track of every item of incoming money, to make sure that there's items indicated here for every paid sale that we charge ourselves with, for every payment on accounts receivables that we charge ourselves with, and to shepherd each item of money through to deposit or other proper dispersal, referring there in that last word, dispersal, to the fact that cash often is not deposited by owners but is taken to other ends, of course. Okay, so I mentioned more in the way of introduction to this post-action report system, that it ties a lot of stuff together, and that's basically what I just showed you. We made that single post-action report. It created the narrative history for us, and it fed particular elements of information into all of those other systems, where those particular elements of information will then be independently managed. That's how it ties lots of stuff together. With that, I now want to look more specifically at each of those other areas. Or actually, I don't. Looking in the manual, still in Chapter 7, Section A, I see there's a couple more things I need to cover here before I go into looking at each of those three areas that I just showed you where the information fed into from that post-action report. One is to show you what we call the WIP alert system. Now, what do I mean by WIP alert? Well, earlier I explained that WIP is an acronym for work in progress. Basically, your job's current form here shows you all the job records that represent your work in progress. Now, what can happen, as you probably know, is jobs can get neglected, basically. They can get sort of lost, they can fall between the cracks, and progress can fail to be made on them, which isn't a good thing. That's why we have the WIP alert system. The way it works is very simple. You'll simply go to your settings form, Control F1, or to go to your settings form, you can click on File Functions and select it here. It reminds you, of course, Control F1. And you'll need to have a particular person in your office whose responsibility it is to pay attention to WIP alerts when they come up. And at that person's desk, if you're a sole operator, of course it will be your desk. It works just the same either way. You'll check this item as being true. Send WIP alerts. And then you'll save local values. And what then happens at that desk is, if the computer's turned on overnight, I believe it's 1 a.m., the manual tells you, but if it's not turned on overnight, then first thing when it's turned on in the morning, or when Service Desk operates in the morning, the system goes through all of your pending current job records and looks at the most recent date here in terms of historical notations and compares that most recent date to the grace period for the status that the job is in. Now, if you're curious about those grace periods, I can hold the mouse button down on any item here, and as you can see, it tells me what the grace period is for that status category. And what happens is the system looks at this date here and figures how many days it's been since that date, and then figures the grace period. By the way, weekend days don't count. I should say it figures how many weekdays it's been since that date and compares that quantity of days to the grace period. And if it exceeds that date, it creates an actual call sheet. Too bad I don't have any to show you here, but the call sheet will say something like WIP alert, and then there'll be a couple hyphens, and it will have a reference to the job record, and it will say in such and such status for, or since such and such date. And basically it's an invitation to you, or a request that you go to that job record and service it. Pay some attention to it to make sure that that it's not neglected anymore. And actually, it even tells you can right-click, and if we had an actual WIP alert here, I could do it for you, but I don't have an actual WIP alert. But you'd right-click on this line, and it would take you right to the pertinent job record that was past due to have some attention paid to it. And you'd look at it, and you'd see what the status was, and whatever the status was, you'd realize you needed to do something to service the job. For example, maybe it's one that you're waiting for a part on, and it's past time when that part should have arrived, and you probably need to do two things. You probably need to call the supplier and say, where's that part? Or maybe it's not past due, but you just need to call the customer and let them know that you haven't forgotten about them. You might do that, simply right-click on the telephone number there and call the customer up. Maybe you leave a message on the recorder indicating that you haven't forgotten about them, that you're still waiting. As you do that, you probably want to add to the history here, left message on recorder. That's my abbreviation for that. Indicating still waiting for part, or something of that nature. And the job's been serviced. You'll have a new date. Now, it doesn't really fit with this because this one already had the same date there and so on, but I'm just trying to illustrate the general idea there. Escape out of it, and you've serviced the job record. The WIP alert served its purpose to remind you to do so, and the WIP alert actually will mark itself for deletion at the point that you do that. So that's how the WIP alert system works. And I could hardly emphasize enough how important and useful the WIP alert system is. Without it, I can guarantee you that you're going to end up with tons and tons of old, stale job records here that have not been properly serviced, or perhaps the job was completed and somebody just failed to do the subsequent actions that put the job record to bed and get it moved out of the current area, which is actually our next subject. At any rate, the WIP alert system is really fundamental. Someone in your organization needs to turn this feature on at their station so that they get WIP alerts, and of course they'll then be the ones responsible for dealing with them. Just briefly, you might notice we have another item here that says WIP Alert Supervisor. What that is for is, let's say you're the boss and you assign a subordinate to be responsible for the WIP alerts, to stay on top of the jobs, to make sure they're properly serviced and so on. But you want to know in case that person doesn't do his or her job. Well, if you turn this feature on at your desk, what happens is if that person gets these WIP alert call sheets, better escape out of here. Actually, I don't want to have either of these set actually on my computer. If the person that's getting these WIP alert call sheets neglects for 2 days, gets WIP alerts on a particular job, and still doesn't service that job, you'll then get a supervisor level WIP alert that tells you that person has not been servicing that job, and they've had 2 days worth of alerts and they've still failed to do it, so you can then go chastise them or whatever it is you want to do. Anyway, that's the WIP alert system, and I can't tell you how well it works. Let me just mention one more benefit. Let's suppose rather than being a one-man shop, you're an owner and you have several techs working for you. One of the fears you should have, most owners don't, if you don't, you certainly should, is whether technicians will either purposely sort of steal a job that you've dispatched to them, that is, they sort of take it over and collect the money and never turn it back in. They make it into their own, so to speak, or they maybe just lose it. They just maybe they collected maybe they did it, collected the money, and then they lost the ticket with the check, and never brought it back. Well, that's another benefit of the WIP alert system. If the post-action report's never made and the stuff never gets turned into you, then the subsequent actions that would get this job record completed and put to bed never occur. You'll get WIP alerts on it, and you'll know to pay attention to it. So it just has all kinds of benefits, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Just pushed a different button than I intended to. Okay, last item in section A of chapter 7 concerns the jobs archive form. I've just been referring to the concept of these job records being put to bed, so to speak. Basically, when you're in full operations mode, the system has the expectation that post-action reports will be made after every appointment, A, and B, after the job has truly been completed, whether after 1 appointment, 2 appointments, or whatever the case is, you'll make a sales report that indicates to the system what the amounts were that were involved in the sale. After that is done, and by the way, that's going to be part of chapter 8 or lesson 5. Anyway, after that is done, the job record then goes into recorded as sales journal status, like this one right here is. And at that point, the job record is no longer truly current, and therefore it doesn't belong in the job's current form or the underlying job's current file anymore. It actually belongs in what we call the jobs archive file, which is viewable from this form, which we bring up with Control F7, called the jobs archived form. The jobs archive form is where we look at all of our past completed, put to bed jobs. And you might notice while in this form right here, we've got, let me do a control page down. We have a total of 172 pending current jobs. In this one, we have presently, back in April of 2000, we had 28,886 past archived jobs. So basically in this form, in this record, in this corresponding file, as time goes by, you'll collect many thousands of records. I'm just hitting page up to rapidly page through a bunch of them here. Anyway, that's the jobs archive form, and it's where all your past jobs are, and of course its records in conjunction with the records from this form, which are much fewer, form the basis for your overall customer database. Okay, that concludes section A in chapter 7, and now we're ready to move into talking about here, I'll escape out of there. Talking about the particular context that those items fed into from the post-action report. I'm going to try to be fairly brief on these, just giving you some highlights, and depending on you still to read the manual to pick up what the real details are. First of all, in regard to special order parts, I think I explained before, we treat special order parts in a completely different context than we do stocking parts. Anyway, for special order parts, I'll bring up my F8 form, and let's suppose it's the time of day that I want to send out inquiry/orders on all the presently items that need such process done. I'll select this item. You notice Q's in quotes. I could simply hit Q or press with my mouse. And we have items here that we need to make inquiries on. What I can do is I can simply click here, and you see we've got this series of boxes. Now we have labels up here that basically show us corresponding positions and what the position stands for. From here, model number, from here, other number, part description here, quantity here, instructions here, and so on. Let's suppose I'm going to order from Marcone for this item, and let's suppose there's a guy named Ted there that I like to have do my orders for me, and I think I can leave everything else blank here, and I'm just going to hit escape, and then I want to fax this and a few other items, and I don't remember the command for this. Now, one thing I should explain, I'm not all that good at this because my secretary always did this. I never did this function. But anyway, I can right click up here and I can get my command summary for this context. And what I want to do is mark some items for fax or request. If I'm in the info band, it says I can control right click. If I was in the text boxes, I could just do control enter. So I'm going to do a control right click here. And the yellow there marks this item as being one that I'm going to about fax. And I look at this item, I want to send it to Marcone 2, and this item, but maybe not that item, so I'll leave those out. So I've got the ones sent or marked that I want to send to Marcone. I'll hit enter on my keypad, and at this point I could either print it on my printer or I could select my machine's internal fax. I don't think I got an internal fax in this computer, or at least not one that's set up. Anyway, if I had one, I could select that as the printing mode, and click on OK, and it will print a nice form for me that would then go off, that I could then feed through my fax to send to the supplier, or again I could use the machine's internal fax. It's asking me if I want to record the transmission of the request. I'll say yes. Those items go gray, which indicate they no longer belong in this category of needing an inquiry order. They don't belong here anymore because it's been done. You notice the text is filled in and so on. There's all kinds of things you can do here. For example, let's bring this back here and suppose we, well actually maybe I should show you the next step. Let's suppose we get a fax back from Marcone that gives us the price on this stuff. By the way, this is kind of geared so that if you don't know that, if you're not doing your own lookups, you can have the supplier do them. If you do, you can provide the information in advance and you don't have to go through the intermediate step of making inquiries. But anyway, let's suppose we get a fax back from Marcone with the information, and we call this customer, and this customer says, oh, by the way, there's quick links you can do right to the job record to make the phone call and so on too. But I won't go into those. Those are going to be in the command summary that you can see here. Anyway, we call back, and the customer says, yeah, go ahead. Well, I can just hit my space bar here and rotate to approved, like so, and now it's in approved status. And the status here was price and availability only, but at this point I'm going to approve it. I could put it in this status, or I could just call them back, and I'm going to type now here to indicate that it's confirmed. See, it corresponds with this, and let's say I'm expecting it tomorrow. I'll put, let's see if I remember right. Oh, it's telling me right here. Oops, little type a number, then D to insert a date. Okay, so I'm expecting it 1 day, so I'll put 1D, and it gives me that date. So that's a little easier than typing the date. So anyway, and then I hit, and then I'll escape, and now I have this information that I confirmed the order on this date. It's expected on this date, and I could do the same with these others. As you can see, it basically helps you keep track of this information. And then when the part came in, I'd come here and I'd type now. Well, actually, I should show you a better way to do that. Let me erase this. Because actually, you're not going to still be in this box when the part comes in. When the part comes in, you're checking in shipments. You'll want to take this category here on order awaiting arrival. And you'll see this come up in that category. In fact, if we went back to this category, it wouldn't be here anymore because it doesn't belong in that category. It's in this category because we've already ordered it. So we check it in, and again, I'll just type now. I could type the date, but typing now is easier. And I'll type how much they charge me for it, and how much I plan to sell it for. Yeah, I like a good markup. And it's asking me if I want to place the item into working to schedule status because this is the only item I have on order. I'll say yes. And again, it dims out because it no longer belongs in the category I've selected for viewing here. And so on. Oh, and one more thing I want to show you here. I'm going to right click here again for the command summary. And I want to see show request, delete info band. I don't see it here. I know there's a command to quick link to the job record. No? Oh, maybe I do it here. Oh, I do it here. Okay, first of all, I quick link to there. And then show WIP, show work in progress. Okay, here's the job record. And you can see that it's got the history here, sent inquiry regarding timer knob, confirmed timer knob order, etc. And then checked in timer knob. So it's kept the history of those items there for me too, and say the customer was to call and you needed the information. You'd have it right there on the job record to see. So anyway, that's section B in Chapter 7, managing special order parts. There's a lot more details, but that should suffice you for now, hopefully. Now we move to section C in Chapter 7 on job management, which is managing stock inventory. I previously showed you this form, and I don't think it's a real good idea to get into great depth explaining the inventory system because of all the systems and service desks, this one really involves some work to set up, but I'll just briefly hit some highlights. The first thing you have to do to set up your inventory system, actually let me just state, you can do everything else in Service Desk except the inventory system very efficiently. You can sort of leave setting up the inventory system until later, and I recommend doing that. Get everything else working. Don't delay getting things working until you got the inventory system working because it takes some work to do it. And I'll now explain that. The first thing you got to do to set up the inventory system is create the master list of everything that you intend to maintain in stock. That's the Control F10 form here. And you can see it's got a whole lot of elements. We can have right on the face for each row of listing, which is a different part. We can have different part numbers, a two-letter abbreviation for the applicable make, a two-letter abbreviation for the applicable kind or type of machine, a description, a retail price, a discount price if you give discounts to anybody, the amount that you intend to maintain on each truck, the amount that you intend to maintain in your storeroom, and so on. Basically, you want to have a listing for each different item. I was just paging through this listing here, by the way, that you intend to maintain in stock. Now you might also notice there's this column here that says supplemental. If I click on this item, it brings up the supplemental form where we can do a bunch of additional things in regard to any particular listing. We can have different quantities for different specialized truck types, for example. We can specify bin location. We can indicate best vendor, ideal cost, maximum cost, notes, and up to 5 additional part numbers. Anyway, a whole bunch of stuff you can do. But this form is where you create and maintain and edit from time to time when you need to the master list, the list of, we call it the catalog of stocking items, of things that you intend to maintain in stock in terms of parts. Now, just in case you don't want to go to all the work of creating this list from scratch, we do on the CD provide this, exactly the list you see here actually. The master list that I used in my own former service business. The thinking being that you probably won't want exactly the same list, but if your business is very similar to mine, if it's an appliance business as opposed to some other kind of HVAC or whatever, and if you do basically multi-brand and not much warranty service. This list might be fairly close to what you ultimately want to have, and if you sort of take it as a beginning basis and delete the things you don't particularly want to stock and add things that aren't here that you do, it might be easier than creating a list from scratch. By the way, with this list, as I recall, there's about $3,500 worth of inventory per truck in this list. And we managed about between 75 and 80% first-time completion with this stock. And from what I've gathered talking to other people, that's pretty darn high, especially with this low of an inventory. I've talked to people that maintain $10,000 in inventory per truck who only have more like a 45 or 50% first-time completion. So if you're doing multi-brand and not much warranty, I think it's a pretty excellent list. Although as time goes by, it may grow increasingly outdated. This was a list from about 2000 or so, or at least the one on the CDs from about 2000 or maybe 2001. Okay, so the first step in setting up your inventory system is you have to create this master list. The second step is you have to actually check in the parts that you actually possess, which you can't do until you first count them, which means you have to have what I call an inventory party. You have to physically count all your parts. I'm not going to go deeper into that. I recommend that you simply read the manual in that regard because it tells you in significant detail how that's done. Okay, last but not least, escape out of there, is the funds control system, which takes us back to the funds form, which I've already shown you like the others. And again, this simply keeps track of each item of incoming money and manages them and shepherds them through to deposit. Also, it's used for checking in payments that are received on accounts receivable after the job was completed, and so on. And I'm not sure if there's a lot of details I need to show you here. I think if you simply read that section in the manual, you'll be in pretty good shape. And rather than tiring you further with this lesson, I think we could presently conclude it. And thank you very much for listening. I look forward to seeing you in lesson 5. Thanks. Bye-bye.